The Prime Minister has launched a new rallying cry for his party to pull together on Europe. Britain was in Europe to stay, he said, but had to fight for its vision of a partnership of nation-states, he told businessmen in London. But within hours, his erstwhile leadership challenger John Redwood was meeting the maverick billionaire Sir James Goldsmith to compare notes on their respective plans for a referendum on Europe. Our political editor Eleanor Goodman reports now on the Prime Minister's bid to hold his party together and the pressures which continue to tear it apart.
It is beef that has been the catalyst for the Prime Minister's recent problems over Europe. But following a meeting today with representatives of the farming industry at Downing Street, it was clear that ministers did not expect an early end to the ban on British exports. Only at best a gradual relaxation.
It could take time. It could move in stages. That is to say, one gets a relaxation to start off with, leading, one would hope rapidly, to a more substantial relaxation. But I don't want to pretend other than that it is going to be difficult, and anything else is not true.
As long as the dispute over beef continues with Europe, so will Mr Major's problems. He had been planning to make a speech on Europe today for some time, but the increase in Euroscepticism, both inside and outside the Conservative Party, gave it an increased sensitivity. What he appeared to be trying to do was isolate Sir James Goldsmith and his Referendum Party on the wilder shores of British politics, while establishing the Tories as the party for mainstream Eurosceptics. He began, therefore, by ridiculing Sir James's suggestion that following a referendum in which voters rejected a European superstate, Britain would be allowed to stay a member of the European Free Trade Area.
Some suggest we could just negotiate a trading relationship with Europe. But I must be frank with you. The idea that if we were outside the European Union, we could somehow become a trading haven on the edge of Europe, with all the benefits of that vital market of 370 million, while others fix the rules without any regard whatsoever to our vital national interest, seems to me to be cloud cuckoo land.
Having rejected the idea of pulling out, Mr Major then went on to repeat his oft-made pledge to stand up for British interests inside Europe. In particular, he promised to block new agreements if Europe continued to try to get round Britain's opt-out from the social chapter.
I have told our European partners in clear and distinct terms that we must change the health and safety provisions so that they reflect the more limited scope that was originally intended and that we originally agreed to. And I take this very seriously. We cannot be expected to have confidence in European agreements if they are subsequently undermined by shifts in interpretation. I do not want to be misunderstood about this. If old agreements are to be broken, I do not see how we can reach new agreements.
It was a classic major balancing act, which he hopes will appeal to the majority of Tories, but it was typical of the kind of approach which some Eurosceptics within his party believe has opened the gap into which Sir James Goldsmith is now stepping. Mr Major said yesterday he would not treat with Sir James, who intends putting up 600 candidates who will campaign for a referendum on Britain's future in Europe. But John Redwood believes he cannot be dismissed so lightly and went to see him today at his temporary headquarters at the Dorchester Hotel as a self-appointed emissary for the Tory party, in the hope of persuading him to stand his candidates down. Mr Redwood himself favours a referendum that would go further than the one Mr Major is proposing on a single currency. But despite finding much common ground on general attitudes to Europe, Mr Redwood was not able to agree a truce.
No, I haven't done a deal. I've had a good conversation with Sir James Goldsmith. We found a lot of agreement over the kind of Europe we want for Britain and for the other continental countries. But of course we were not able to agree on how you get there, either through party politics or through the Referendum Party. He repeated to me that his party will only field candidates in those constituencies where they judge that there is no candidate who might be able to win who is strongly committed to the right kind of Europe and would be happy with a referendum.
That means Mr Redwood himself might not be challenged, but his fear is that the Referendum Party, which is apparently not that worried about the prospect of a Labour government, could siphon off Tory voters unless Mr Major takes a much tougher line on Europe. That, he says, is the message from the grassroots in his own constituency of Wokingham. At the Sonning Golf Club, members certainly don't like the idea of being dictated to by Brussels, but didn't seem that interested in Sir James either.
He's a very shrewd person. He's made a lot of money. I think he's reached the stage in life where he's looking for other avenues to develop.
I'm a bit of a Eurosceptic myself, and I think there's a lot of damage done in the common market. But then, yes, we should have a free trade with other countries. I mean, you've got to get a sort of a happy medium.
I'd like to see a referendum whether we stay in Europe or not.
Mr Major is not going to concede that wider referendum, but in his search for more clear blue space, it is likely the Tory party will adopt an increasingly Eurosceptic tone.
Eleanor Goodman. Well, I've been talking with the Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkin, and I put it to him that on the heels of yesterday's parliamentary manoeuvre by the Eurosceptic MP Ian Duncan Smith, which triggered a rebellion by 66 Tory MPs, the debate is now no longer about a referendum for a single currency, but about our whole relationship with Europe.
Well, first of all, we have not 66 MPs, we have well over 300 members of Parliament. Secondly, yesterday, what you're referring to was actually a vote on a 10-minute rule bill on the question of reforming the European Court. Now, we ourselves believe the European Court ought to be reformed. So does the French Prime Minister. It's going to be an important issue during the Intergovernmental Conference.
But you opposed yesterday's bill precisely because you knew what it was. It was a curtain behind which all sorts of other things were going.
Mr. Snow, we did not vote in yesterday's 10-minute rule bill.
You had whips outside stopping anybody on the government payroll getting involved in that debate.
We were advising the members of the government neither to vote for nor against that particular bill because we believe the European Court does need to be reformed. That's an important point of principle, but we did not support the specific measures that Mr. Duncan Smith was advocating in his bill.
Do you accept then that John Redwood is in any sense doing the Conservative Party's bidding with Sir James Goldsmith?
John Redwood is a backbench member of Parliament. We live in a free society when members of Parliament do not need the permission of me or the government whips as to who they speak to. That's their responsibility, which they can explain in their own good way.
But doesn't the very fact that you are taking to the hustings today illustrate that you are very concerned about what John Redwood, what the 66 and what Sir James Goldsmith are all up to?
Well, that's the first time, if I may say so, that a Prime Minister speaking to the Institute of Directors has been described as going to the hustings. A rather interesting definition of the hustings, but on the merits of your question, yes, we want to make it quite unequivocally clear the government's commitment to Britain's membership of the European Union. It's important that there is no dubiety about that. There may be some individuals, both within our party, within the Labour Party and elsewhere, who want to argue for a different scenario.
But there is dubiety about that very issue, isn't there? There is actually a split, and a split this time not about the European currency, but about the whole question of whether we should pull out of Europe. That's actually what people are talking about.
You know as well as I do, for the last 30 years, both within the Conservative Party and in the Labour Party, there have been a small number of members of Parliament who want Britain to leave the European Union. The idea that that is some new phenomenon is complete baloney, and you know that as well as I do.
What, finally, Foreign Secretary, do you want done about Sir James Goldsmith's threat to Conservative candidates? Do you want an accommodation?
No, most certainly not. What Sir James Goldsmith does is a matter for James Goldsmith. He's a member of the public, he's a citizen with the same rights as everybody else.
And a little more money.
He happens to have a lot more money than anybody else, and that is up to him how he chooses to spend it. But the idea that an unelected person who is simply spending his money in order to publicise his views, that somehow you have to negotiate with such a person would be absurd.
What would your view be of Conservative members of Parliament who decide to engineer any kind of relationship with him?
Each individual member of Parliament will do what he or she thinks best. We, as a government and as a party, will put forward the policies that are in Britain's interest. We will put them forward honestly, we will put them forward with clarity and with conviction, and the British public, in good time, will come to their own judgment. That's what democracy is all about.
Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkin talking to me earlier.